Hey everyone, this is Jen and you're watching BPD Woman. On this channel, you will learn how to more effectively live and manage your borderline personality disorder. Or if you have CPTSD, or if you just consider yourself a highly sensitive person that has trouble regulating your emotions, you're in the right place. My goal is to help you achieve your goals using positive solutions to recovery. I use my experience living and managing borderline personality disorder in the last 30 years that I've lived with it, in the last 20 years since my diagnosis. Since that time, I have attended multiple rounds of DBT, done one-on-one therapy, group therapy at home, book reading, workbook therapy, research, staying on top of trends and studies, and of course, I have my own YouTube channel. As you can tell, I'm pretty committed. I share my actual life experience and therapeutic knowledge. And while I recommend a psychologist or a life coach, of which I am not, I do answer one question that those folks cannot, which is, what is it like to live with borderline personality disorder? And while having a psychologist trained in personality disorders is absolutely essential to your recovery, in my opinion, I can offer you a perspective that they cannot, which is, what is it like to live, breathe, and actually manage this? And so I can give you some nuances in addition to some relatable therapeutic experience to help you along your way. If you're a family member or a coworker or a spouse or just anyone interested in positive-based solutions to recovery, you're also in the right place, and there's a playlist just for you entitled Vids for the Family. Check it out. If that all sounds good to you, please hit subscribe and the bell below. I produce anywhere from 3 to 5 videos each week, all something new, and I also take video suggestions. So without further ado, let's get started. So I want to talk about something that I think is very universal to all of us, whether you have BPD or not, and that is loneliness. And that's today's video topic, my experience with borderline and loneliness. As you watch this video, please leave a comment below and talk a little bit about your experiences. I welcome you to talk about your experiences dealing with loneliness. How lonely do you feel? Maybe you don't feel lonely. How that's affected your recovery, how having borderline makes that more difficult. So drop me a comment below, and if you don't feel comfortable dropping it there, you can also email me at womanbpd@gmail.com. So that's WOMANBPD@gmail.com. So let's talk about loneliness. And I've done several videos on the topic of friendship. And for me, and there's also a playlist that you can find a link to above, BPD friendships. So I want to talk a little bit about my experiences dealing with loneliness in the past, what that has meant, how I've tried to remedy my loneliness, kind of some life lessons I've learned along the way, and then I'm going to share a little bit with you about my insights and how I manage feeling lonely now, and what other symptoms and characteristics of personality disorders play into this feeling of loneliness. So let's get started. I was chatting with a client who just happens to be a life coach, and I was asking her, I guess for me, I really latch on to hearing other people's experiences dealing with friendships. So, if someone says, oh yeah, I have friends coming over this weekend, or, oh, I just saw a friend, and then the next day I see them like, oh yeah, I just hung out with a friend. In me arises a sense of jealousy, envy, but also curiosity. Because for me, I really feel like I never learned how to make friends, be friends in a healthy way. And so I think I know a lot about codependency, but when it comes to just positive, natural, organic friendships, I sort of sometimes stumble along the way. And so we're going to talk about how that BPD walks into this. So I was talking to her, and I was very sick over a few days last week, and I didn't have really anyone that I felt I could call out on. I felt I could, if really needed an emergency, I felt I could call a few people, but I didn't feel like they would just drop everything. And so very hesitantly, I reached out for nothing. I prepared myself and I had what I needed at home. And so obviously in these times of sickness or aloneness, we reflect a little bit more on our loneliness. And the next couple of days after I felt better, I had a client, and I talked to her, and you know, she's very outgoing and gregarious, and she always seems to be going on vacations with friends, and her and her husband have a lot of friends. And so I asked her, I said, you know, well, how do you do it? You know, how do you have these friends? How do you always surround yourself? You know, like, she's still in touch with stepdaughters from a previous marriage. She still has contacts from high school, which I don't. And I wanted to know more about this, and you know, and so we had this interesting conversation, and a few things she said jumped out at me. So she said, you know, I don't know you specifically as a friend, and keep in mind, she is a life coach. She said, I specifically don't know you as a friend. However, she's like, you're very easy to talk to. Our conversations are always positive. She's like, but you also strike me as, and I thought she was going to say a complainer, because one of the things that I feel may be turning people off, and you know, if you have some self-insight about things that you may be doing to turn others away or make them less likely to engage with you, I was going to say that I complain too much. And what she said was, no, I wasn't going to say that, which was a surprise to me. She said, but you seem discerning. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, she said, you seem very careful about who you let into your life. And I said, you know, and I thought of that. I was like, well, yeah, that's not a bad thing. You know, I think it can be a bad thing if I let no one in, or I was completely discerning, or I never allowed anyone to stumble. And then she also had a couple of other insights. And I said to her, I said, you know, well, I was really sick this past week, and you know, my neighbor, she was sick a couple days ago, or like a couple weeks ago, and I was there for her, asking her what she needed and texting her. She knew I was sick. My neighbor knew I was sick. She said nothing. She offered nothing. And my friend said, well, you know, I mean, my husband, he's had friends who have had surgery, and I have said, hey, did you check up on so-and-so after their surgery? And he would say, oh, no. But it didn't necessarily mean that they weren't friends. Okay, yes, that's a point. However, I would comment by saying, you know, men are less likely to be communicative, especially with one another. And, you know, also, she had been sick and I checked on her. And so I was expecting the same. That's what you call balance, reciprocity, right? The other interesting thing my friend said was, you know, and this is something that I've kind of come to my own conclusion about. What is your definition of a friend, right? Some people can have a very narrow definition, and other people can have a very broad definition, right? And depending on what your definition is, you may just by default have more friends. If everyone you see on the street that you can have a 5-minute chat with, you consider a friend, well, then you may have tens and dozens and hundreds of friends, right? But if you consider a friend, you know, just someone who you would call in the middle of night, or, you know, to bail you out of jail, or, you know, would come over and stay with you for a few days if you had a surgery, that could be a different definition. And I think I probably fall on that more specific end. And so anyway, so, you know, it gave me a little bit of insight. It made me feel a little bit better. But then I still feel within me, you know, even though I have insight is nice, I still ponder on what would make me feel less lonely. And so I want to talk a little bit now about the history of kind of where this loneliness came from and how I used to manage it. Let's go. Always in the back of my mind, something that I wish that would come with some BPD materials or DBT classes is just a book. And the book would be entitled something like How to Make and Act Like a Friend. You know, like they have finishing school books, and, you know, how to be the perfect host, and, you know, how to set a perfect table, and, you know, there's so many how-to books, right? And they have how to make friends and how to put yourself out there. But for me, honestly, like, I really need something even, sometimes I feel like more specific, because I feel that I don't strike the right balance. And, you know, this goes back to growing up in an environment that was incredibly volatile and violent, where my parents argued all the time and split up essentially before I was in first grade. And because of this, my living situation was not a place that other kids' parents wanted to send their children to come play, and rightfully so. And since I didn't get a lot of other social interaction, I didn't know how to make friends really from the beginning. I mean, I remember this very early memory where this girl called my house and she was in school and I answered the phone. I remember I was in the kitchen and it was orange wallpaper and I said hello and she said, would you like to come over? And I was like, I literally passed the phone to my mother and I was like, I don't know what this is. Like, and it was a little girl asking me to come over and play. And excuse me, that's a kitty cat. Hello. And I felt awkward, so even from my earliest experience, I don't remember how to be socially graceful on the phone or fit in, awkward. And so I didn't have a lot of kids come over, and then there were times when I did go to birthday parties or did get invited, but because of the volatile, terrible place and emotional and physical well-being that I was being put through, I would act out, I would throw things at other kids, I would throw tantrums, right? And so people sensed that and they didn't let their kids. And so as I grew into kind of high school, I found my niche in places, I had friends, like I went to some parties. I definitely fell like in with the theater crowd or the choir crowd. And I had a few, friends here and there. But, I never felt really popular. I never felt like I was doing the right things. And so always in the back of my mind, I have felt alone. I didn't really have a family that I felt strong and healthy connected to. And then as the years and decades went on, I feel that I didn't have a friendship group that remained stable. And especially when my BPD symptoms were not in check at all, I was cutting off more people, I was splitting more, I was judging more, I was being more black and white with my thinking. And so this all sort of did not make for good friendship ground. Now, when I was married in my early 20s through my early 30s, my ex and I, we both drank, but I had a drinking problem. And so we had these huge parties, right? And lots of people came over and I could have 30 or 40, 50 people over for a party. People we had really successful parties. And so I also kind of inherited his friend set group. And then over the years, just for some other reasons and others, sometimes it was my just natural relationships that didn't end. One was like a business deal that went bad and affected the friendship. And the other was simply sometimes just out of behavior. What behavior? So once I got sober, I felt like that window of friendships closed. And this is something else that life coach friend of mine mentioned, was that, your friend groups as you get older may change, right? The things or behaviors that you may have thought were fun and good for you then, sorry about the noise, were good for you then, don't translate the same 10, 15, 20 years later. And you may have different interests or different friends. But always in the back of my mind, I kept thinking throughout all of these instances, is it me? Is it my BPD? Am I doing this wrong? I've had friends say things to me like, you don't have to try so hard. And honestly, I never thought I was trying hard at all. Sometimes I didn't think I was trying hard enough, right? So let's move on to sort of my next chapter into this. As sort of the years progressed, I found myself getting kind of sad or jealous, or being in a throuple rather than like a best friend duo relationship, right? Like kind of like that backseat person that's like, what are you guys talking about, right? And so I never felt like I had my own sidekick, right? Like I always felt like I was the Flash or Cyborg. Like I never felt like Wonder Woman or Batman. So I would gather lots of people, like to birthday parties, to dinner parties, to Christmas parties. And I would think, okay, like, and this is when I began to be sober. thinking, okay, this is going to make me feel better. It's going to make me feel more connected. And you know, even when I was in these big birthday parties of 20 people, it was in my celebration, I felt alone even then. I felt a sense of sadness. I felt a little disconnected. I felt out of place. And so here I was in a room full of 30 people, still feeling really lonely. So what is that all about? As I speak about this and as I reflected on this, a few very interesting general topics come up out of this thing of loneliness. And I think, as you can see, even though I have been alone and felt lonely, and then I've been with people and felt lonely. What does this mean? Because it certainly doesn't mean an absence of people, right? But I think some things that come down to is really this absence of deep connection. And you know, some of us with BPD or other personality disorders do sometimes have a awkward or difficult time connecting. And that's not to say we're not empathetic. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that for me anyways, there's just sometimes been a feeling that I'm not connecting. Perhaps that's because I'm shape-shifting or, you know, changing identities. That would be kind of one of the loose criteria, the diagnostic for BPD, you know, changing who I am to fit in with others. And so I'm not really being true to me, but perhaps I'm amending to them. Like, oh, they like big parties, I'll throw a big party. That will make me feel better. Oh, you know, you like Dungeons and Dragons, let me see if I can get into Dungeons and Dragons. You know, like, these are not things that really interest me. So the first thing that I want to kind of point out here is that sometimes this loneliness can be a lack of connection with ourselves and of what we really want out of a certain event. You know, now I've learned I'm totally fine spending Christmas or my birthday alone. That doesn't bother me. It doesn't make me feel sad, and I no longer sit and I cry in a room about what a loser I am. I mean, I don't ever really think I was a loser, but back then I thought, you know, I'm a big failure. I don't do that anymore. So this is sort of this connection with, like, okay, so for instance, my birthday's coming up very soon, okay? What will make me feel happy that day? Well, getting a really long massage, getting a haircut and a manicure, because those are things that I haven't done in probably a year. So that's like self-love day, right? Come home, have a piece of cake, be with my animals. To me, that sounds magical. Like that sounds like a great way to relax, and that's what I need. Let's go to some other themes. So something else obviously that I've done is this splitting or getting rid of people, right? You know, you're in or you're out, you know, you're there for me or you're not. Like, there's no wiggle room, there's no error room. And this is a little bit of what my friend alluded to earlier with her description about her husband still being friends with the guy, even though he had surgery and he didn't check up on them. Like, they were still friends. So I think for me, sometimes I have a very high expectation that often I have heard from people cannot be met. However, I feel that I live up to a high level of expectation. I call when I say I'm going to call. I show up when I say I'm going to show up. I bring the dessert if I say I'm going to bring the dessert, right? It's building a reliability and a reciprocity into a relationship. And so, yes, I think some of these I have cut out or not followed through with, again, because I felt awkward or I didn't know what to do out of this loss of connection or true connection with myself. And so I cut off people necessarily. Or sometimes other behaviors like my anger, okay, scared people away. You know, I've heard that, you know, your anger is scary. Like, I've been scared by your anger. So let's go to a different theme now, and that's worry. So worry and fear of rejection are something else that really plays into it for me, and even till this day. So here's an example. There's a very nice, lovely couple, probably in their late 20s, early 30s, and they live in the building, and they have 2 dogs. And, you know, we've run into each other a few times, several dozens of times over the years. It's not a huge building. And they have 2 dogs and I have a dog, and we've chatted and we've gotten to chat a little bit more lately, and finally we exchanged phone numbers. And so I have been wanting to send her a text saying something like, hey, Xena, that's my dog, Xena was wondering when she could see her boyfriends because my neighbor has 2 male dogs and they get along. Right, so this is a cute little fun text, and basically it's inviting her to come out and spend some time walking the dogs. Well, I didn't. Hey, stop. Speaking of dogs, stop it. I didn't. Mommy's making a video. I didn't because I'm afraid, and I'm worried that it sounds weird, or they don't like me anyway, or there's this fear of rejection. And so I think some of this loneliness is not liking myself sometimes, and so that translates into me thinking other people won't like me, or being too fragile in a state. So I don't reach out to people. And sometimes that's self-preservation too, like, are they gonna hurt me? Like a bunch of other people have hurt me, like what's to say this is going to be any different? So this is something else that's kind of played into this feeling of loneliness. Sometimes it's self-inflicted loneliness. I can be an extrovert in a lot of ways, but something else that really plays into this feeling of loneliness is being shy. So you've heard of introverts and you've heard of extroverts, but sometimes there's this thing called an extroverted introvert, which means I really like being on and being the center of the party, but also I like the safety of a comfortable environment and knowing what's to be expected. And sometimes that means, like encamping myself where I live, or sticking to a routine, or, somebody may say, oh yeah, I'm having 20 people over, and like that, like just sounds so stressful to me. So part of this is a safety issue. And, if you have BPD, well, no shock to you, you've probably experienced a ton of trauma in your life, right? And so this trauma has shown me a really ugly, evil side of people. And so I am much less willing to put myself out there on a number of fronts, knowing that that exists. I don't think that's necessarily bad. She's determined to interrupt this video. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but it is a component that feeds into this loneliness. Again, it sort of goes back into this, I'm afraid to ask people, like to go on a dog walk because of rejection. And well, on this other front, I am afraid to be rejected because they'll be unsafe, right? Or I'll be put in danger. So this is another element. The last thing that I want to hark back to is that it's the mechanics, right? Like, how does this work? Like, I like you, and then like I see you and I'm like, okay, would you like to come over for dinner? Like, does that work, or is that too much? How often am I allowed to call? Like, how does it, like, so these are sort of things, like what I would call the mechanics of like how to be a friend or how that works, that I think have like confused me along the way. And then I don't know what to do, and then I feel awkward, and then it plays in again, like this low self-esteem. So now that I've talked about some themes to kind of think about as you consider loneliness, now I want to talk about some reflections on loneliness. Borderline recovery does get better with age, as long as you put in the work and time and commitment, right? As I said, 20 years ago, I could not be alone on my birthday. Now, I'm like looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to spending time with me. So this is the first thing to consider about loneliness, is really being comfortable with your own company. Why? Well, first of all, you have to like who you are before other people can like you. And also it sets you up when you're not feeling desperate. It sets you up to seek out people that want an even-keeled relationship like you do, right? Tons of people get into codependent relationships. I think I used to be highly codependent, right? And I couldn't bear to be alone. Well, I don't feel that way, and I don't act that way anymore. So this is sort of a good thing about having less people around. And this is also where this discerning comes in, right? I'm not acting on some of these negative behaviors, destructive behaviors, like the drinking, like the pill taking, like the codependency, like the chasing people around that don't want me. I don't do that anymore. I end relationships that aren't healthy. But again, I still feel lonely because I feel that I don't have the mechanics or the friendships on others. On the other hand, however, when I was sick the other day and feeling pretty alone, I felt really disconnected. And so, you know, as you can see, as we wrap this up here, that there are so many different things that go into feeling lonely. I have felt lonely with a group of people. I have felt lonely by myself. I have felt really in touch with life when I haven't been in a relationship, and then I've been in a relationship and felt really disconnected. And so there's no magic button here about what fixes loneliness or what the causes loneliness. Is I can only say with all of my other videos, you just have to keep trying. You just have to keep at it. And one thing that I keep trying to tell myself is to stop making comparisons. You know, anytime someone tells me they're going out with their friends, you know, or they've been invited out with their friends, honestly, to me, that does sound like the lottery. I'm like, wow, like they want to go out with you. Like, that's so cool. I don't get invited that much, right? And I try to stop myself because honestly, the comparisons don't help. I don't know anything about those relationships. And given the situation, if I were in those relationships, I don't know how comfortable I would feel. I still obviously feel bouts of loneliness. I still know that like feeling lonely is not just a component of BPD, right? But I do know that making the right decisions for myself and my health, and not being a doormat and not hanging out with people that I really don't want to hang out with. Like I did this video, why am I friends with people I don't like? Check that one out. Is the right direction to be going in. My name's Jen. You've been watching BPD Woman. Please leave your comments below. Share your experiences on loneliness. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. And until I speak with you next time, in everything you do, please be effective. Bye-bye.